Welcome to Dwell, a 6-week experience in abiding prayer. I want to take a few minutes today and explain how this experience is going to work, but first I want to begin with a verse. It's a verse that's found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In verse 17, the Apostle Paul writes, "Pray without ceasing." Now, it's a very familiar verse, but it's also an incredibly misunderstood verse. Because for most of us, when we hear that, we think, what? Pray without ceasing? Is that really even possible? We may give lip service and acquiescence to a command like that, but frequently it's not truly our experience. Well, I want to challenge us with two things. And the first one is that it is indeed possible. Because if it were impossible, our gracious, good Father would not command it of us. And secondly, I want to challenge us to see it perhaps more so than just a command as an invitation. It's an invitation to live life a certain way. It's an invitation to view our lives a certain way. First, it's an invitation to live our lives a certain way. You see, when we heard the word prayer in that verse, we often think of talking. We think of asking God for things. But in the scriptures, prayer is so much more robust and so much more involved than simply talking. It's about living life with. In John chapter 15, Jesus said to his disciples, "Abide with me." And that word abide means to remain, or to use the analogy of the vine and the branches, it's to stay connected. And so in its fullness, prayer is about living in the constant awareness of God's presence. And then secondly, it's about seeing our lives in a new way or a different way. Seeing our lives as prayer, as the essence of who we are. In the Message translation of Psalm 130, verse 5, the psalmist writes, "My life is a prayer. I will wait to see what he will say and do." It's a beautiful picture, a beautiful statement to say that our life is prayer. And again, what the psalmist is saying there is that the very essence of who we are is our connection with God. And so the question is, how do we stay in a place of constant connectedness? How do we live in that place? Because the reality is we end up getting very distracted on a day-to-day basis. A few days ago, a friend of mine shared with me a story of a young monk who had just joined the monastery. And he was assigned to an older monk. And he would ask that older monk questions every day. And finally, after a few months, the younger monk asked the older monk, "Do you still wrestle with the devil?" And the older monk said, "Oh no, not anymore. I've grown much too old and too tired to wrestle with the devil. And besides, I think the devil is tired of wrestling with me." And the younger monk replied, "So then life must be pretty easy now." And the older monk said, "Oh no, actually, it's much more challenging because now I wrestle with God." And the younger monk, surprised and perhaps a bit confused, said, "Well, do you hope to win?" And the older monk said, "Oh no, my son, I hope to lose." You see, prayer is about losing ourselves in God. One of the challenges to that is that our lives are often compartmentalized. Our thoughts, our emotions, our body, our will are not integrated. We're not living integrated lives in response to who God is. See, Psalm 63 says, "My soul yearns for God, And we'll talk more about this next week, but the soul in the scriptures is really a term that talks about the wholeness of who we are. And yet so often our body, our mind, our emotions, our will, our heart are not integrated in such a way that the fullness of who we are is living in communion with God. And so in the following weeks, we'll look at the different aspects of who we are and how to bring those aspects of who we are to God in prayer. Each week will involve a short video introduction and then a 4 to 5 minute prayer experience that I will challenge you to do each day. And that prayer experience will be in an audio file that you can play each day and just follow along with. Well, as we prepare ourselves for this study, I want to challenge you to spend some time meditating on Psalm 63. And so I prepared a short Lectio Divina exercise. And if you're not familiar with Lectio Divina, it's an ancient way of reading and reflecting on the scriptures in which you listen with the ears of your heart to the scriptures several times and then reflect prayerfully on what you are hearing and what the Spirit is highlighting in your heart, in your spirit. And so I'm delighted that you're going to be joining me for these 6 weeks. Take a few moments each day now before we start next Monday and reflect on Psalm 63.